It was a brisk, moonless night when my friends and I decided to hail a cab. The bar's neon sign flickered ominously as we stumbled out, laughter echoing through the empty streets. It had been years since our last reunion, and the alcohol had only loosened the bonds of nostalgia. There were 5 of us: Mike, Lisa, Jamie, Sarah, and me, Alex. We flagged down an old black taxi that seemed to materialize from the shadows. Its paint was chipped, and the headlights cast an eerie glow. The driver, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes, barely nodded as we piled in. A chill ran down my spine, but I dismissed it as the night air. The interior of the cab was cold and smelled faintly of mildew. We squeezed into the back seat, the leather creaking under our weight. The driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and I quickly looked away, feeling an inexplicable unease. "Where to?" he asked, his voice gravelly, like stones grinding together. "Just take us home," Mike slurred, waving a dismissive hand. "We live on the west side." The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. The city lights blurred past, and an uncomfortable silence settled over us. The initial buzz from the alcohol was wearing off, replaced by a growing sense of dread. I glanced at my friends. They seemed oblivious, chatting and laughing about old times. Minutes turned into an hour. The route was unfamiliar, the streets darker and narrower. I leaned forward. "Hey, are we taking a detour? This doesn't look like the way to the west side." The driver didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the road, expressionless. I felt a surge of anxiety. "Seriously, where are you taking us?" Lisa noticed my agitation. "Alex, relax. It's probably just traffic or something." But there was no traffic, just an endless stretch of deserted road. The cityscape had given way to a desolate, rural area. The cab's headlights pierced through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and occasional road signs, which seemed oddly unrecognizable. Suddenly, the cab stopped. The driver turned to face us, his eyes burning with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Get out!" "What?" Jamie exclaimed. "Why? Where are we?" "Get out!" His voice was a low growl, menacing and final. We exchanged uneasy glances, but there was something in his gaze that compelled us to obey. We scrambled out of the cab, the night air biting through our thin clothes. The driver watched us with a predatory stare, then drove off, the taillights vanishing into the darkness. "Great, now what?" Sarah muttered, hugging herself against the cold. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no idea where we were. Panic began to set in. "We need to find shelter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We started walking, the gravel crunching under our feet. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us. Every rustle, every snap of a twig made us jump. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated house. It stood like a sentinel in the clearing, its windows dark and vacant. "Maybe we can find a phone or something inside," Mike suggested. Reluctantly, we approached the house. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a dusty, abandoned interior. We fumbled for our phones, using the dim light to navigate. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of decay. "Split up and look for anything useful," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. We spread out, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The house seemed frozen in time, filled with old furniture and remnants of a past life. I wandered into what seemed like a living room, the wallpaper peeling away like dead skin. An old photograph on the mantel caught my eye. It was faded, but I could make out a familiar face, the cab driver. My heart pounded as memories flooded back. Years ago, We had been involved in a hit-and-run accident. It was late at night, and we were drunk, driving home from another party. We had hit a man, and in our panic, we fled the scene. We had sworn never to speak of it again, burying the guilt deep within us. But now, it seemed our past had come back to haunt us. I heard a scream from upstairs. I ran towards the sound, finding Lisa and Sarah huddled together, eyes wide with terror. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "You can't escape." The house was alive with a malevolent presence. Shadows moved on their own. Whispers filled the air. We regrouped, fear gripping us. "We need to get out of here," Jamie said, his voice trembling. We bolted for the door, but it slammed shut, trapping us inside. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. The driver's ghostly figure appeared, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You thought you could run from me?" he hissed. "You left me to die. Now it's your turn." We screamed and backed away as he advanced, his form becoming more solid and menacing. The house seemed to close in on us, the walls pulsating with a dark energy. We had no choice but to confront our past. "Please, we're sorry," I begged. "It was an accident." "An accident?" he snarled. "You didn't stop. You left me there to die alone." Tears streamed down my face. "We were scared. We were young and stupid. Please, let us go." He paused, his anger wavering for a moment. Then, with a sudden burst of fury, he lunged at us. We scattered, desperately trying to find an escape. The house became a labyrinth of terror, with the ghost always one step behind. Finally, we found ourselves in the basement, cornered. The driver loomed over us, his eyes burning with vengeance. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Sarah stepped forward. "We'll do whatever it takes to make it right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Tell us what you want." The driver's ghostly form flickered, his expression softening slightly. "You can't bring me back, but you can bring justice. Confess to the police. Make sure my family knows the truth." We nodded, our hearts heavy with the weight of our past sins. The ghost faded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We stumbled out of the house, the first light of dawn breaking the horizon. The walk back to the city was long and silent. When we finally reached a police station, we turned ourselves in, confessing everything. The driver's family was finally able to find closure, and we were sentenced for our crime. Years later, as I sit in my cell, I can't help but feel a strange sense of peace. We had faced our past, and though the road to redemption was long, we were finally on it. The ghost of the driver had found his revenge, but in doing so, he also gave us a chance to make things right. My wife, Sarah, and I had been looking forward to our weekend getaway for months. We both needed a break from our demanding jobs and the constant hustle of city life. Our destination was a quaint bed and breakfast nestled in the hills, surrounded by nothing but nature. The road there was long and winding, but the scenery was worth it. As we drove further from civilization, the GPS signal became unreliable, and we found ourselves navigating by memory and intuition. It was late afternoon when we spotted it, a bright yellow taxi parked haphazardly at the side of a narrow, deserted road. The taxi looked out of place, miles away from the nearest town. Its front bumper was dented, and one of the tires was flat. The doors were wide open, as if the driver had left in a hurry. "That's odd," Sarah said, peering out the window. "Should we check it out?" I hesitated. Maybe someone needs help. We pulled over and stepped out of our car. The air was still, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and our footsteps on the gravel. I approached the taxi cautiously. The driver's seat was empty, but but I could see an old, tattered cap and a worn jacket draped over it. The faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered inside. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no response. The surrounding area was eerily quiet. Sarah opened the back door and gasped. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a faded photo taped to the back of the passenger seat. It was a picture of a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, wearing the same cap and jacket we saw in the front. His eyes seemed to bore into us, even from the photograph. "We should call for help," I said, pulling out my phone, but there was no signal. "Damn, no service." "Let's just get back to our car and leave a note for the authorities," Sarah suggested. But as we turned to leave, I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to look inside the trunk. "Wait a minute," I said. "Something doesn't feel right." Against my better judgment, I opened the trunk. Inside, I found a small, weathered suitcase. When I opened it, I was met with a strong scent of decay. Inside were personal belongings, an old driver's license, some clothes, and a small leather-bound journal. The driver's license belonged to the man in the photo, Richard Thompson. "Look at this," I said, showing Sarah the journal. The pages were filled with cramped, barely legible handwriting. As I flipped through, one entry caught my eye. October 15th. "They won't let me leave. I've been driving this damned taxi for years, and now they're coming for me. I can hear them whispering, calling my name. I can't escape. If you're reading this, stay away. For the love of God, stay away." A chill ran down my spine. "We need to go," I said, shoving the journal back into the suitcase. We hurried back to our car, but as we got in, the engine sputtered and died. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I don't know," I said, trying to restart the car. It was no use. We were stranded. "Maybe we can use the taxi," Sarah suggested, though her voice trembled with doubt. Reluctantly, we made our way back to the taxi. I slid into the driver's seat and tried the ignition. To my surprise, the engine roared to life immediately, purring smoothly despite its dilapidated appearance. "This is insane," I muttered, but we had no other choice. As we drove, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. The headlights of the taxi cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisting path ahead. Sarah clutched my arm, her knuckles white. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it, whispering. Soft, unintelligible whispers filled the cab, growing louder with each passing minute. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The reflection showed the back seat, but it wasn't empty. The shadowy figure of a man sat there, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Sarah, don't look back," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She turned slowly, her eyes widening in horror. "Oh my God, it's him! It's the driver!" I slammed on the brakes, but the taxi didn't slow down. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of angry voices. The figure in the back seat leaned forward, its cold breath on my neck. "Why are you in my taxi?" the voice hissed. "We didn't mean to," I stammered. "We were just trying to get help." "Help?" The figure laughed, a chilling, hollow sound. "There is no help, not for you, not for anyone who dares to take my taxi." The steering wheel twisted in my hands, and the taxi veered off the road, speeding through the forest. Trees blurred past us, and I fought to regain control. Sarah screamed as the taxi hurtled towards a large oak tree. I braced for impact, but the taxi swerved at the last moment, throwing us into a ditch. We crawled out, shaken but unharmed. The taxi sat idling, its headlights casting an eerie glow on the surrounding trees. The whispers had stopped, but the air felt heavy with malevolence. "We need to get away from here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. We stumbled through the woods, guided only by the faint light of the moon. After what felt like hours, we emerged onto another road. A passing car stopped, and the driver, an elderly man, offered us a ride to the nearest town. As we climbed into his car, I glanced back towards the forest. The taxi was gone, but I knew we hadn't seen the last of it. The spirit of Richard Thompson was still out there, bound to his cursed taxi, forever seeking revenge. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I tried to put the incident behind us, but the memory haunted our dreams. Every time I saw a yellow taxi, my heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's vengeful spirit was watching, waiting for another chance to claim a soul. One night, months later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. The line crackled, and a familiar, chilling whisper echoed through the phone. "Why did you leave me?" I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. The nightmare was far from over. Richard Thompson's curse was still with us, a dark shadow that would never fade. And so we live in fear, knowing that one day, the abandoned taxi will find us again. And this time, we might not escape its wrath. I've driven these streets for years, and not once had they led me astray until tonight. I picked up my passenger, a nervous young woman named Sarah, around midnight. She was headed to the outskirts of the city, but no sooner had I entered the address into my GPS than the cab seemed to take on a life of its own. The steering wheel twisted violently out of my hands as the cab veered off the main road, turning onto a narrow, crumbling street I'd never noticed before. Sarah screamed, clutching her seat, as I fought to regain control, but the car refused my commands, accelerating into the darkness. "Where are we going?" Sarah's voice trembled with fear. I could only shake my head, mystified and terrified, as we plunged deeper into an abandoned part of the city, where buildings stood hollowed out and consumed by ivy, windows like dark, watching eyes. The taxi's headlights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the graffiti-covered walls, whispering secrets in a language of decay. The atmosphere thickened, heavy with a chilling mist that seemed to rise from the ground itself. "I've heard stories about this place," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the cab's rumbling engine. "They say it's haunted, that people who come here never leave." I wanted to reassure her, to tell her we'd be fine, but the truth was, I was as scared as she was. The cab slowed as we approached a large derelict factory, its gates mysteriously swinging open, as if welcoming us to our doom. The car stopped, and despite my attempts to restart it, the engine was dead. The silence that followed was oppressive, a thick, tangible entity wrapping itself around us. "We need to get out," I said, my voice firm despite the fear that knotted my stomach. Sarah nodded, and we cautiously stepped out into the cold, damp air. The factory loomed before us, its broken windows gaping. A sudden noise from inside made us freeze, a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being moved across a dusty floor. Then, a child's laughter echoed, chillingly out of place. Without thinking, I grabbed Sarah's hand and ran, but no matter which direction we took, every turn seemed to lead us back to the factory. It was as if the building was reshaping itself around us, trapping us in an endless maze. Breathless and desperate, I spotted a small office with a door ajar. Inside, an old radio crackled to life as we entered, spitting out fragments of a decades-old broadcast. The room was filled with old maps of the city, including areas that no longer existed, except, it seemed, here. Poring over the maps, a realization dawned on me. A chilling understanding of our eerie surroundings. This part of the city had been abandoned after a devastating fire. Rumor had it that the mayor had hidden something valuable in this very factory, something worth haunting. Determined to find a way out, we searched the office and discovered a hidden tunnel beneath a loose floorboard. It led to the sewers, a possible escape route. As we navigated the dark, narrow passages, the sounds from the factory above faded into a suffocating silence. After what felt like hours, we emerged on the other side of the city, the lights of civilization twinkling in the distance like a beacon of hope. We never spoke of that night again, and I avoided driving after dark. The city reclaimed that haunted quarter, demolishing the factory and paving new roads. But sometimes, when I pass by the area where it once stood, I can't help but feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, and I drive a little faster, always afraid that my car might once again turn against my will.